Hi, we have all heard of Friedrich Nietzsche, haven't we? What probably makes Nietzsche most famous is the striking claim that God is dead. To be precise, he writes in his work, The Gay Science, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. What does this mean? Apparently, it seems irrational. Either there is a God or there is no God, but if there is a God, then God is supposed to be eternal and thus can die. Nietzsche's claim, however, is that God is a fiction created by human beings. Hence, God dies when there is no good reason to believe that God exists. Although that's not the subject of our discussion here, but just for your info, Nietzsche made these claims in a backdrop where, after the Enlightenment, the idea of a universe that was governed by physical laws and not by divine providence had become mainstream. The governments no longer needed to be organized around the idea of divine right to be legitimate, but rather by the consent or rationality of the governed. The large and consistent moral theories could exist without reference to God. That was unprecedented in European history and largely in human history also. So, leaving politics and statecraft aside, here our discussion will help us understand Nietzsche's claim in its intent, his arguments for it, and its potential implications for contemporary religious and ethical thought. So, what is Nietzsche's reasoning for claiming that God is a fiction? The answer consists in the purpose of the idea of God. According to Nietzsche, the idea of God was constructed to help people deal with prevalent and apparently meaningless suffering. The ancient Israelites who produced the Judeo-Christian God lived in dreadful conditions for many generations. They were enslaved, beaten, and killed. Under such immense hardship, it is utterly sensible for them to find some reason to explain suffering and hope that those responsible for suffering will be punished. The idea of God fulfills that role. The idea of God develops to offer light in a dark world. From ancient times to today, most people turn to God when things get terrible or awful tragedies happen. For many, belief in God provides strength to endure such misery. For example, losing a loved one or being diagnosed with cancer or whatever. So belief in God also offers hope that when we lose our loved ones to death, we can find and live with them again in the afterlife. Belief in God warrants that no loss is beyond repair, no injustice unreciprocated, and that we can finally have never-ending peace, no matter the suffering gone through to get there. Hence, for Nietzsche, there is a natural justification for belief in God. God is a mental construction crafted to alleviate suffering, soothe pain, and offer companionship in the face of misery. Nietzsche thinks that we don't need to believe in God to handle these challenges. Nietzsche says that rather than try to evade suffering by embracing some otherworldly entity, we should use suffering to better ourselves. A genuinely meaningful life rests on achieving personal excellence, and such excellence requires overcoming struggle. People like Nelson Mandela, Emma Goldman, and Ludwig van Beethoven achieved greatness by facing down hardships. Nietzsche contends that nothing truly exceptional in this world comes from peace and satisfaction. So, in a place he says, the discipline of suffering, of great suffering, do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far? Moreover, he thinks that belief in God sustains weakness. For example, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Matthew 5:5. For Nietzsche, walking with God is walking with a crutch. If we face suffering on our own, we get stronger and have greater potential for excellence. Curiously, Nietzsche asserts that many modern atheists continue to believe in God, though they don't recognize it. To quote him, this deed, the death of God, is still more remote to them than the remotest stars, and yet they have done it themselves. Atheists often fail to understand the true extent of atheism. Well, how is that so, you might ask? The answer is this: atheists continue to espouse conventional moral principles, and these principles imply that people are morally equal. According to Nietzsche, belief in God is the only way to ensure moral equality. In On the Higher Men, Nietzsche writes, and I will quote it for you: "You higher man, learn this from me. In the marketplace, nobody believes in higher men. And if you want to speak there, very well, but the mob blinks, we are all equal. You higher men, thus blinks the mob. There are no higher men, we are all equal, man is man. Before God, we are all equal. Before God, but now this God has died, and before the mob, we do not want to be equal. You higher men, this God was your greatest danger. It is only since he lies in his tomb that you have been resurrected." So, and then also when he is discussing moral judgments and condemnations, he says they constitute the favorite revenge of the spiritually limited against those less limited. And Nietzsche then says that those who fight for the equality of all men before God almost need faith in God just for that. So if God were to exist, then we would all be equal as his servants. But what makes us equal if God is dead? For Nietzsche, not for me. For Nietzsche, nothing. Why think a fighter in Afghanistan, for example, is morally equal to a Ku Klux Klan member in Wisconsin? Our abilities and propensities to respect others, to feel pain for them, to love are hugely different. Thus, we lack universally common traits essential for moral equality. Atheists show a belief in God as long as they think that we are equal. Nietzsche also thinks belief in God binds excellence. Equality helps the social order, encourages mediocrity, and suppresses genuine individuality. Religious traditions emphasize selflessness, humility, and sacrifice, and promise eternal consequences for the conduct on earth. But certainly not all individuals thrive while upholding these values. Some individuals are exceptionally self-affirmative, proud, and strong. So what would happen to someone such as Beethoven if he were not to feel pride in his work? Nietzsche's worry is that if potentially outstanding individuals were prevented by some eternal order to feel self-affirmative, proud, and strong, they might not become excellent. If they start believing that everyone is equal, such that they never prioritize their needs and interests over the needs and interests of others, they might not become great. So for Nietzsche, belief in God hinders greatness. Therefore, he says, God is dead, and human progress requires defeating the relics of God found in traditional morality and moral equality. You have to know that Nietzsche is not merely atheist. He is anti-theist who contends that belief in God suppresses thriving. For Nietzsche, we should discard belief in God and concentrate on cultivating our own values, setting our own goals, and achieving personal excellence. Now, as we wrap up, it's not my place to pronounce a verdict here. Instead, I will leave you with 4 important questions, considering which can help you better evaluate Nietzsche's critique. First is, what do you find more credible? Nietzsche's view about the origin of the idea of God, or other narratives such as that it's true that there really is a God and that's why people believe? Second, do you find that belief in God indeed encourages weakness and saps self-reliance? Third, does morality necessitate equality, and does belief in equality demand belief in God? Fourth, do you think that belief in God indeed limits the development of excellence? Answers to these questions are necessary for you to attempt a full evaluation of Nietzsche's provocative claims. So I will leave you with this exercise for yourself when you have some time and desire to attempt it. For me, it's time to sum up our discussion. Nietzsche declared God is dead. This statement doesn't mean that Nietzsche believed in the literal death of a deity, but rather he was expressing the idea that the traditional concept of God as an all-knowing, all-powerful, and morally perfect being had lost its power and relevance in modern society. Nietzsche argued that the decline of traditional religious beliefs and values would lead to a moral crisis, as people would have to find new sources of meaning and purpose in their life. He believed that people could create their own values and morality, rather than relying on religion or other external authorities to dictate what is right or wrong. And I have already at the beginning provided you with the backdrop in which Nietzsche was operating or thinking. Therefore, Nietzsche thinks that the death of God would lead to the emergence of a new, more self-aware human being who would be free to create their own destiny and pursue their own goals, rather than being limited by religious dogma or social convention. Overall, Nietzsche's idea of God is dead is a reflection of his belief in the importance of individual freedom and the rejection of traditional authority in favor of personal responsibility and creativity. So, hope this helps you understand what Nietzsche meant. Our idea and purpose here was not whether he was right or wrong, partially wrong, totally wrong. The idea was to help you understand what he meant. Once you understand that, and if you want to evaluate it further, I have provided you with the questions to use as tools for doing so. So happy thinking. Thank you very much, and we shall meet again.